Right here discussing today the third book of Vergil's Aeneid. Now, this week we're doing books 2 and 3 together. You'll see most of the focus is really going to be on book 2. Book 3 is a sort of disjointed series of adventures as Aeneas makes his way down eventually to Libya. So we'll cover some of the highlights here in some of the ways it kind of looks at big pictures of the poem as a whole. So, what happens here in Vergil's third book of the Aeneid? Well, first he tries to found a new city, Aeneadae, named after himself, but there are bad omens, so it doesn't work. Then he tries to found another city, Pergamum. Now there's a plague, so it doesn't work. So they keep going on, encountering many of the same monsters that Ulysses in Latin or Odysseus in Greek and his crew did, such as the Cyclops. There's a note later on where they actually just sail right by Circe's island because one of Odysseus's crewmen tells him, like, no, don't go over there. So as we compare Odysseus and Aeneas approaching the island of the Cyclops, it's another moment we can compare how Vergil and Homer treat the same material a bit differently. So in Homer, and this is Odysseus narrating his own adventures, we sailed on, our morale sinking, and we came to the land of the Cyclopes. Lawless savages who leave everything up to the gods. These people neither plow nor plant, but everything grows for them unsown. Wheat, barley, and vines that bear clusters of grapes watered by rain from Zeus. So it's a lawless, savage society, but on the other hand, crops growing on their own is a common image in Greek myth of the Golden Age. So we have these lawless brutes living in a sort of Golden Age agricultural paradise. Switch to Vergil. A large harbor lies there, the water sheltered and still, but Aetna thunders nearby, with horrific crashes and darkens the sky, with swirls of black smoke and glowing ash. Globes of flame rise to lick the sky's dome, and then the mountain retches up rocks, its own wrenched out entrails. So one big difference, Homeric geography beyond Ithaca and Troy, and even then, is very vague and fuzzy. Most of Odysseus' adventures can't really be placed on a map, which hasn't stopped many people from trying for nearly 3,000 years. But Vergil gives us a very specific landmark that would be known to many of his original readers, Mount Aetna on Sicily, which is still an active volcano, because that whole kind of region, even extending underwater, is a geological formation that includes Aetna and also Mount Vesuvius and a number of other volcanoes in Campania. It's a very geologically active region. So he is specifically locating the Cyclops on the island of Sicily. Now, the reason for that is, in Greek myth, there's sort of two different versions of the Cyclops. There's the monster that eats Odysseus's men, but then there are the ones who, as Hesiod, another Greek ancient poet, tells us, are artisans for Hephaestus. The Cyclops, as a group, not just the one monster, are the ones who actually make the thunderbolts for Zeus and the other gods. Stuff for them too. As Greek myth develops, as we're getting to Rome, especially because this whole area, Sicily and southern Italy, is so heavily settled by Greeks, Aetna comes to be thought of as the workshop of Hephaestus in Greek Vulcan, from whence we derive the term volcano. So there's one big difference between the Odyssey and the Aeneid. Vergil gives us a very specific location for this. And the imagery, you might notice, is also very similar to the imagery we were talking about in Aeneid 2, this light and darkness, this sort of chiaroscuro effect. So, they're encountering all these different monsters. Then they encounter Helenus and Andromache. Andromache was the wife of Hector. Helenus was one of Hector's brothers. The hero Helenus Priam's son, came from the city with a great company. He recognized us as kin and led us joyfully to the city's gates, yet weeping profusely at every word. As I advanced, I recognized a little Troy, a Pergamum modeled on the great one, a dry creek named after Xanthus, and I embraced another Scaean gate. These are all landmarks of Troy. What Helenus and Andromache have done is to recreate a little Troy, like a Disneyland version of Troy. But uh, Vergil presents this, and Aeneas kind of reacts to it as if it's funereal. They're just focused on the past and on death and on what they have lost, and they've tried to recreate a very empty version of that, appropriately in a palace that was vacated by uh, Achilles' son Neoptolemus. Remember, the one who killed Helenus' father. Even when Andromache sees Ascanius, Aeneas' son, she's instantly reminded of her own son, Astyanax, who was a baby thrown off the walls of Troy by Odysseus and killed, and again reminds her of Hector. In fact, when she first sees Aeneas, she thinks that he's a ghost, which remembers how he initially saw Hector in Book 2, her former husband. So what this stop, I think, functions as in the narrative and for Aeneas' character is to confirm for him, as if his mother hadn't really tried to do that in Book 2, that he can't be focused on the past. That what Helenus and Andromache are doing might be healthy, maybe even not, for them, but it's definitely not for Aeneas. He needs to go on and found something new. It cannot just be a Disneyland version of Troy. You can't leave New York City and then satisfy yourself with living in the mini New York City in that one Las Vegas casino, or to leave Paris and be satisfied with the version of Paris that's in Epcot Center. And so Aeneas, as he leaves them, says, "Live happily. Your destiny is complete. We are still called from one fate to another. Your rest is won." If anything, this almost seems to prefigure his journey to the underworld in Book 6. It's this first initial encounter with death. Yes, technically they are still alive, but they're just focused on remembering the dead and what they have lost, and that's all that they can do. And that's their destiny. It's done. There are no more stories told about them after this. But Aeneas must still go on. So he encounters Helenus and Andromache, and he takes on Achaemenides, a former companion of Odysseus or Ulysses in uh, in Latin. Now, this is not a character who is mentioned anywhere in Homer's Odyssey. He is someone who is created by Vergil as a sort of way to connect his poem much more explicitly with the previous poem, beyond just these references we've seen before. So what are the trajectories in Book 3? We have an escalation in violent imagery with the harpies, with the cyclops, with the plague, with the funereal imagery when they get to Little Troy in Epirus, which, just remembers the destruction in the previous book, and they're living in a remodeled palace of the person who killed their father in Helenus and their husband in Andromache. The inescapable fate that Aeneas can't just stay there. He must move on, even though they can't. And the recognition in Achaemenides that Homer's Odyssey is a very explicit model for the text. And we'll see another kind of self-reflexive moment in Books 7 through 12, which is very explicitly described as a new Trojan War, because these Trojans just can't help themselves, stealing people's women. Where Vergil calls attention to the fact that now he's emulating the Iliad instead of the Odyssey. So, Book 3, again, it's just kind of, adventures. It's almost like a montage book, if anything. And we'll return in Book 4 as this second trajectory here, this inescapable fate, meets the incipient love affair between Aeneas and Dido, which, remember, was started by his mother in the first place, because she got Ascanius, went off to an island somewhere, and she replaced him with Cupid, who was technically his uncle and Aeneas' brother. Okay, so remember to watch this pairing with the video on book 2. Books 2 and 3 are our main assignment this week. We're going to move on to reading at least 2 books a week. That might jump up to maybe 3 or 4 with some parts of the Odyssey, but that's also because there are a number of books of the Odyssey that are much shorter than what we have in the Aeneid, even though it's 24 books instead of 12. All right, guys, have a great week.